I was like, as a materials culture to teach with.
In Berlin, yep.
Welcome.
No, the 880W, they have a special archive, but they will start now.
Savitri has his experience as designer, academic researcher. He's now senior at the Royal College of Art in London. Is this too noisy? Shall I close my windows? Shall I keep maybe one open for air?
Maybe keep this one open and we close the other ones. Okay. It's without.
Yeah. These are the mics?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe after.
I've been asked to move because the camera's there apparently. So I'm going to change position and start again with less noise and visibility. I think that makes sense. So again, a warm welcome to this paper exchange. I want to introduce the facilitator, Dr. Savitri Bartlett, who has 20 years experience as a designer, academic researcher, and is now a senior tutor for research at the Royal College of Art in London. Her former work was as a project lead at the Institute of Positive Fashion for the Positive Fashion Council, and as such she was involved in mitigating clothing returns, and a link to the report that she put together there, or that she co-authored, can be also found in the biography in the programme. Her current research focuses on the Global South threatened by exploitative models of clothing and food production. So a warm welcome to you.
Thanks.
And I hand over the facilitation. Have a great session.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I think the way that we could run this is that each set of speakers will do a 15-minute presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions, okay? Because then it's fresh in everyone's mind. And so the plan is that when you come to present, you come here and you will click the button. Once you finish, you move up and then let the next person go through. So if we could start with both of you. I mean, we just move along here. Mm-hmm. If you come second, third, and where's Mayu? Muyo? Yep. There you are. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you.
I have to excuse myself because I'm running a workshop now, not out of interest. Have a great session.
Thanks so much for coming along. My name is Leela Kelleher. I'm Assistant Professor of Fashion Design and Social Justice at Parsons.
And I'm Emily Haggard. I'm Assistant Professor of Fashion Communication at Parsons.
And we're going to be presenting on some work that we've been doing at Parsons to disrupt the dominant thin narrative in fashion schools, and to share some of the initiatives we've been doing in order to create student desire to work in fat fashion. So we're going to just go over a bit of an introduction and then talk about the lab that we've started and some of the initiatives we've done. And then we're going to finish off talking about sustainability in this space. And then it's just, I'd like to, I'm using fat as a neutral descriptor of body size through this presentation for those that identify as fat. and plus size to describe larger clothing in the fashion industry.
Thank you. Yeah, so just a brief introduction to frame the conversation and set a bit of a context for why we started the Size Inclusion and Fashion Lab at Parsons. So we have these very sort of striking statistics. The global plus size clothing market is valued at approximately $288 billion in 2023. However, we still see a lack of plus size offerings, technical design skills in the industry, and the lack of media that features plus and fat bodies. Education is frequently cited as an important barrier to size expansion. So most institutions are offering fat fashion courses within the elective space, but there's not critical study in the core curriculum that stresses the importance and the vital role it plays in the future landscape of the industry. And then it's worth noting as well that Western ideals of beauty and the thin ideal still prevail and is reflected across fashion. So when we talk a little bit about the thin ideal and fat phobia is rooted in racism, I pulled a quote here from Sarah Simon from Miss Magazine. She says that fat is also a queer issue and a racialized issue and an issue of class because fatness is inseparable from all other intersections of identity.
So we'd also like to frame this discussion today as viewing fat fashion through two different lenses. So the lens of inclusion and the other lens of desirability or aspiration. So in terms of inclusion, fat and large bodies are very underrepresented in the industry, both in terms of product assortment and offerings, as well as very much in media. We sometimes see kind of performative inclusion, for example, fashion brands showing plus sizes on the runway with a single plus size model, but don't actually manufacture that size for consumers to buy, which is very performative. And furthermore, if brands do a size expansion, if straight size brands typically do a size expansion, they often end at about a US size 18 or sometimes a US size 24 or 3X, which it really excludes a lot of large and plus size bodies. As Emily mentioned, the technical skills with respect to fit, pattern making and production are often quite lacking, and that is cited as one of those barriers to producing size expansions.
Yeah, so looking through the lens of desirability, and that's what we're really focusing on in the lab and some of the initiatives we're going to talk about, is really creating a desire in students to want to create beautiful clothing and beautiful designs for fat and plus size bodies. I think now there's a view of students that when they're designing for plus size, it's about solving an issue or it's a problem to solve. And so we're really trying to reframe that. And we're oftentimes seeing as well a lack of plus size forums as well as access to fit models at universities. And because of the marginalization of plus size bodies, people do not feel welcomed into the industry. And so we're not seeing fat and plus size fashion students as well. So it's sort of perpetuating a system within the university as well. And then we're also seeing the greatest offerings in plus size in fast fashion. So, it further stigmatizes the consumer and they don't get to be seen as aspirational, which is really important in terms of creating this desire. And a quote, most institutions are leaving plus size as an alternative choice of study. This continues to fuel the separation between straight and plus sizes while sending the message that the plus is a separate and lesser entity. And this quote is from Gianfranco Russo from 2020.
So we launched the Size Inclusion in Fashion Lab as a research lab at Parsons, and we're dedicated to improving size inclusion in the fashion industry, specifically with respect to plus sizes. And we want to create a bridge between education, the consumer, and the industry as a whole. We advocate for body-neutral fashion education, and our goal is to normalize size inclusivity throughout the curriculum, including fashion design and technical classes, as well as classes in marketing, communication, and management. And we address both the inclusion side as well as the desirability in the work that we do. And we're now going to discuss some of the initiatives that we have been doing so far.
So the first initiative we hosted over the summer was an industry roundtable just to get sort of a pulse of the current industry and understand some of the barriers. So we invited 4 industry professionals leading in the plus size market, and they really talked about sort of the lack of product assortment. So we're seeing, plus size and activewear, but not in categories such as denim or knitwear or wovens. It's hard to find plus size in stores, so we're seeing this, they talked about customer acquisition, so there isn't the accessibility in stores as well as in e-commerce, so garments are oftentimes not shown on models in every size, so it's very hard for the customer to see themselves in the product. Production challenges, so oftentimes there's this perception that production is more complex when it comes to plus size garments. Marketing as well, which is my area that I teach in, we're seeing this sort of fat phobia and perception of luxury aspiration, and how do we really shift that? And then obviously we talked a little bit about education, so both practical and theoretical. Financial blocks for brands, so we have this idea of actually it costs more to create plus size blocks. Extra fittings, systemic and corporate. So a lot of the brands we spoke to said that nobody really wants to be the first. So they want to see a really good example. When I say a good example, of course, it's financial and bottom line. So, we see these sort of failures in the market. So within the US, Loft Plus and Old Navy are examples of this. So Loft Plus and Old Navy launched Loft Plus folded, and then Old Navy said they would offer plus size in all of their stores, and then they went back to online only. So there's not really a model that these brands are seeing as successful.
In the spring, we launched a Fat Fashion Elective, which is really framed by the work of fat liberation, fat studies, and fat activists. So the first half of the course was kind of framed by readings from the fat studies literature and informed by fat activists as well as the fat liberation movement, which is a civil rights movement that works to tear down systems of oppression and discrimination against larger bodies. And then students really developed familiarity with the lived experience of plus-sized folks. The second half of the class was making-based, and the students co-created designs with fat-identifying community members. And this was an example of bringing research into the classroom as well. The co-creators were participants in a research project that I'm completing called FATSO, Making Identity and Fatness. And FATSO explores the lived experience of fat-identifying people who subvert these dominant fashion narratives and systems by making their own clothes. And so what we did in the course was they went through the process of designing, pattern making, and then constructing garments with their co-creators. And what we saw was really increased critical thinking skills, especially surrounding these two-dimensional, three-dimensional transformations in terms of pattern making. So initially we saw people trying to use the same processes that they might have learned in their typical fashion classes and realizing that it wasn't going to work for larger bodies, and then coming up with their new systems, and obviously we were helping them as well, coming up with new ways of doing things, and those actually applied not just to plus size bodies but to all bodies, because it allowed them to more critically think about the processes that they were doing in order to create solutions. The course evaluations were really successful this course, and students really recognized that they were attaining skills that did have transferability across all the work that they did.
So another course, this is an elective that I teach to students across the New School, so from different disciplines, and I'm very much an advocate that design it should be really supported by marketing and communications and the narratives that are being put out. So I teach a course called Fashion Collaboration as a Practice of Change, and we really talk about collaboration as a form of knowledge share, innovation, and expertise. So we frame this in sense of sustainability. So we look at brands working within regenerative farming and with brands like Oshadi, as well as we look at how innovation can be formed through brands partnering with an expert in plus-size design. So we see brands like Rodart partnering with Universal Standard, who's an expert in that area, so it allows them to gain that knowledge through collaboration. And within this course, I also look at queering the concept of branding and aspiration. And really what that means is we really kind of deconstruct the idea of branding and aspiration and why some bodies are seen as aspirational and some are not. Where does aspiration come from? Where do the ideologies that brands have sort of baked into us, how does that form, and how can we maybe negate that? Yeah, and then sort of just thinking about disorienting the gendered, racialized, and classist everyday practices of branding, aspiration, and lifestyle.
So we have a book coming out next year. So it's co-authored with Gabby Brown. It'll be coming out with Bloomsbury late next year, late 2024. And so it will be the only specialized textbook that focuses on both on production and custom apparel pattern development. So it's designed for upper year students who already have an existing skill set of pattern making. And if you have ever tried to draft a plus size pattern from existing fashion design textbooks, you may have found that the rules just do not work very well. You sometimes get a pattern that doesn't even look like a pattern. And so we've developed new processes in order to draft patterns that work not only for plus sizes, but they actually do tend to work for small sizes as well. They use more of a proportionally based system. Throughout the book, we use gender and also body neutral language, and we include material on accessible and adaptive design. The book's also designed for rapid skill acquisition for both students and within the industry itself, because we know that there is a great call for brands who are wanting to expand, but also realizing that there's not much fashion education available in this for this specific market. And we include practical considerations for working with plus size fit models in the industry. So using respectful language with your fit models, for example, and imagery of larger bodies. And we use an anatomically based neutral body language and also different measurement procedures that apply to all bodies that are based on skeletal measurements, like using skeletal landmarking for measurements rather than soft tissue landmarking, which is what we typically use.
And one of the initiatives we're launching this October is a student competition, which will be in plus size only. So again, really trying to create that desire in students, and that is one way. Sometimes you have to work in the current systems that are existing and things that they get really excited about. So we're working on a student competition, and the students will be actually producing their collection with a production partner called Vive. We met Vive a couple of months ago, well, probably 6 months ago, and we were really talking about this idea that it's thought that production is much more complex and plus they really strongly disbelieve in that. They say that you should be able to work with your partners. And so we're working with them on-demand production, and the 12 finalists will be part of a custom elective guided through final design, which will be taught by Leela in the spring. The production process, and the winners will have their looks produced and sold with a retail partner. So creating that desire, hopefully.
And finally, we'd just like to talk about sustainability. We really feel strongly that there's a lot of nuance to be had, especially in spaces where where we're talking about marginalized bodies that are very marginalized by the fashion industry. So, for example, quite often people call for stopping all fast fashion, and plus size consumers don't have very many options, and to be honest, it's actually quite hard to overconsume as a plus size customer. So I think that it's probably less of a concern. We don't see those huge holes in plus sizes that we might do in straight sizes, simply because there's not enough product assortment. And then we propose that using, really applying nuance to this, and instead of looking at where a garment is produced or how it's produced, or even the fabrication, maybe a better measure is how that garment is treated through its life cycle. Is it being mended? Is it being well cared for and used for years and years, as a better measure of sustainability when it comes to more marginalized bodies? Furthermore, plus size bodies, traditionally have had basically no access to capital F fashion and very little access even to small f fashion. And so, we feel that it's people are insisting from a position of size privilege that that people behave in a specific way. It can be really counterproductive, because you're asking a marginalized group to really conform to a behavior that's being requested by a group that has a lot more privilege, especially with respect to size privilege. And I think it's also important to note here that weight-based discrimination is legal in most states in the USA. And in Europe, in 2014, it was recognized as a disability, but it is also quite hard to argue. So weight-based discrimination very much exists, and it is legal. And so therefore, fat and plus size people are often discriminated against when it comes to employment and are more likely to be underemployed. So we see a lot of intersectionality with socioeconomic groups, for example, which further marginalize people from fashion, either capital F or small f fashion. So we have some references here. Please feel free to email us if you would like our reference list or if you would like to discuss anything with us further. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily and Leila. I'd like to open it up to all of you, actually, because there were some really interesting points that you drew out of there, and I'm particularly interested in vocabulary, particularly when it comes to fat, gender, racial issues. What was the vocabulary that you had to re-educate your students about? That would be my question, and then I'll open it up to everyone.
Yeah, yes, for sure. I mean, fat is an extremely loaded word, right? It's often used as a very negative word, and people often co-opt it as they might be feeling fat or they're worried they're going to get fat. But it's being really reclaimed as a real neutral descriptor of body shape. However, it's very, very important, I think, to recognize the systems of harm that the word fat has been used for many, many years. And so many people who live in larger bodies, so that is a term that I think is pretty neutral, living in a larger body, do not actually identify as fat. And so for myself, I'm very careful not to use the word fat to describe people if I don't know how they identify. And so you may have noticed that throughout the presentation, we were really switching between fat and plus size. So I use the term, we use the term plus size when it comes to clothing and the fashion industry, since that's the dominant terminology. And then, but then if we're using very kind of neutral terminology, then I think larger bodies is fine. I think that a really important word that I would request that maybe we think about a little bit more is the word flattering, because we use that all the time in fashion education. And if we think about what flattering means, is we're usually using it to say, oh, it makes you look kind of better than you really are. And and in most times that means it's making you look smaller or slimmer than your real body. And so when we're using that coded language about thin people or fat people, whoever it is, we're really, perpetuating the idea that like fat is like a negative word, and we don't want to have fat bodies around. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Can I just open it up to everyone? Is there anyone who has a question they'd like to ask? Anything that jumped out of that? Yes.
You were telling that you develop patterns as well.
Can you speak up? Is there? There's no mic, okay?
I'm
Speak
trying
up loudly.
to speak a bit
Be really
louder.
loud. Okay.
You were speaking that you develop patterns as well. Are you planning to publish a book around your knowledge?
Gabby's book.
Yeah. So there's a book. There's a
question.
So the question was about patterns. So we are releasing a book. It will be published next year by Bloomsbury on plus size pattern making. So that's where we have block drafts for a kind of full set of useful type blocks that are appropriate to plus sizes. And it's a draft by measure system. So.
Wonderful.
And you've got a question, yeah.
I just wanted to continue with that conversation about the pattern making, because I think rethinking pattern making has been on my sort of agenda for so long. But in terms of decolonizing pattern making as a means to this industry, everybody talks about decolonizing fashion, but decolonizing that pattern making process to include. So I'm absolutely well done on producing a pattern making book.
Thank you.
I think that's such a, I mean, we underestimate that it's the architecture of the garments that we wear, and that this symmetrical pattern block that has been inherited as the block that all schools use.
Yeah.
And if you go to India, if you go to West Africa, are there other pattern methods that we can engage with in this realm of fashion? So
For sure, yeah.
I'm curious about where you did how that came about through practice.
Through practice, I have a home sewing pattern business actually, and it's interesting because the process of home sewing or like making your own clothes for flat and plus size people is very, very different from straight size people because oftentimes fat people are not able to buy clothing that fits their body at all in store, or they can only buy e-commerce, or they can't buy it at, to fit their other values or their styles even. And so they're really forced to make all of their clothes, many people. Whereas, for a straight sized individual, they might have that choice to make their own clothes as a hobby, right? And it's just like, and it's an addition. So through making patterns and then being able to see them on thousands of different bodies and going through fitting processes through a whole range, we've been able to really develop some kind of what we think are best practices in terms of like in making sure that we're including like typical bodies for each size into that pattern. So, someone who's like a size 30 is going to have different like body attributes than someone who's a size 18, for example. Someone who's a size 40 is going to be different again. So, I strongly believe that the plus size pattern isn't just one pattern, but it needs to be suitable for a typical body at each size band. And I still think, we do, as, working in the fashion industry, we still do need to make, generalizations. But I think there are generalizations that can be made in terms at each sized band.
Thank you. Is there a question? Yes.
I will have a question. Thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. You actually, if I understood right, you said that mostly the availability for fast fashion products or clothing can be found amongst the fast fashion companies. Is that right? Okay, when I think it, would it be more easy to actually transfer this into slow fashion, a kind of more niche market, because actually the bodies could have different needs, and all the bodies are, I mean, even for 38, it's all different. All the women are different, or 36, but kind of fits to everyone for fast fashion understanding, or the big F kind of understanding of dissemination of the product. But if there are different needs for different bodies, different proportions, different skills, I mean, kind of on-demand production and the switching to a kind of more sustainable and ethical kind of, transfer of the market could be, I think, could be more easy. Did you think about that, or is there any possibilities? I mean, I think in your living in New York, is there any possibilities or opportunities in the New York market to find that kind of examples of slow fashion collections, or at least creating a kind of maybe stimulating students or young designers to create such initiatives? I don't know. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do as well with the competition with Beam. But it's not to say there are more sustainable brands. Mara Hoffman. Leela's wearing a Mara Hoffman dress today. Eileen Fisher. There are brands that are creating plus size. And we're saying there's more options in fast fashion, but we're not saying it's being done well in fast fashion. So I think absolutely there's an opportunity for slower fashion, for more designer. We have a lot of the images that we use are of designers who show on the runway, so it's designer fashion in plus. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a huge opportunity. I think there are a very few number of sustainable fashion brands expanding to plus sizes, and when they do expand, it's not very large. And also oftentimes the fit is not there. I think it's very systemic, because I think oftentimes we see a completely different silhouette on their size expansions than we see in the straight sizes. So there's just a completely different amount of design ease and wearing ease sometimes, but design ease in garments. And so the look is completely different. But I think that because people aren't used to seeing beautiful garments on plus size bodies, like that fit well, it's almost like there's no kind of exemplar of what good fit can look like on a larger body, and therefore people are satisfied with a fit that wouldn't really be acceptable in smaller sizes. And the best work is actually being done in fast fashion in terms of fit, which is, you know, it's really unfortunate because we all do want to improve sustainability in the industry, but we're so far away from that right now. And the fact that the best product offerings are in fast fashion, you know, is, you know, it's really appalling and distressing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for an inspiring talk. And Lars, could you come in for the next presentation? Thanks.
Hi everyone. Well, I would say welcome, but I'm also welcome. It was, I mean, already it was a brilliant day, and yesterday was amazing also. So I'm so grateful actually to share this moment with you. I see so many familiar faces, and also people that I get to know and exchange numbers. So I'll be, yeah. I'll always remember this moment. So about me, I'm Pierre-Antoine Vettorello. I'm a fashion designer. I graduated from the Antwerp Fashion Department, and I'm doing a PhD at St. Lucas School of Arts and University of Antwerp. I'm also teaching at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Brussels, Instituto Marangoni in Paris, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, my name is Lars Paschke. I'm professor for fashion design at Burg Giebichenstein University of Art and Design in Halle. Yeah, we studied together both in Antwerp, that's how we know each other, and I had a bit of a root of interdisciplinary projects, mostly like design perspective, and I have been an assistant professor here at the Institute of UDK for a while, and then Pierre actually contacted me if we don't want to, maybe we want to write a paper together for this conference, which we did then. So we tried to, as you will hear, try to revisit the archive and explore it as a tool for innovation and reflection in fashion education.
Thank you. So I'll be reading. So as a fashion designer, educator, researcher, whatever title you go by, you've likely experienced a moment when you try to explain your profession to family and friends. It's that familiar scenario when your conversation partner responds with, "Someday you'll become famous." This moment can send a shiver down your spine and leave you feeling uneasy. Fashion, with a big F, is often linked to prestige and recognition, emerging as a conduit for conveying symbolic value. At this moment, you just responded with a gentle smile, hiding that your research focuses on deconstructing the notion that fashion equates to fame. After all, the fashion industry tends to highlight iconic names and figures from the history of Parisian and Western fashion, often overlooking those who don't fit into these categories. Fashion is often linked to prestige and recognition, emerging as a conduit for conveying symbolic value. Much like numerous students embarking on their fashion school journey today, as former fashion students were initially inspired by the career of celebrity designers, those creative geniuses whose work graced the pages of fashion magazines and headlines, instilling in us a sense of liberation and the ability to create an alternative reality. Back in the 90s, for individuals identifying as LGBTQI+, pursuing this path provided access to a multitude of opportunities and a chance to help shape a new society one built on acceptance and compassion. Fast forward today, and the world has undergone profound changes. In an area marked by increasing colonial exploitation, climate crisis, and racial capitalism, the considerations that should guide one decision to enter fashion school must evolve. Both to contemplate whether our choice is about contributing to the construction of a new societal order, one that prioritizes questions like, should one enter this institution to take a leading role in driving societal transformation, or should one reinforce this industry that often perpetuates toxicity, obsolescence, and resource extraction? This question places us as educators in a pivotal position with a significant responsibility in this endeavor. Do we wish to be active participants who supports the system negative aspects, or do we aspire to be disruptors, acting as killjoys, to refer Sarah Ahmed, within the toxic fashion system? This entails being willing to critique and challenge the perception of the dream that may of us have held since, for some, as far back as the 1990s. Rest assured, as fashion educator, your role is not about extinguishing dreams, but rather about nurturing a fresh and innovative outlook that fosters limitless possibilities through the power of imagination. Outdated fashion industry stereotypes continue to attract students who hold traditional beliefs about a modernist fashion world characterized by extraction, the creation of celebrities, non-consensual practices, exploitation, appropriation, categorization, and self-celebration. It is our responsibility to challenge these colonial power structures, combat oversimplification, prevent the acts of othering, and avoid essentializing clothing. However, a persistent question arises: should we still devote attention to those figures who have significantly influenced the Western history of dress within a curriculum that has limited time for comprehensive coverage? How can we reconcile this body of historically validated archives with the emergence of new narratives? Should we prioritize teaching methods over specific content? How should we implement a shift breaking barriers between Western fashion and the rest of the world? Thanks to numerous recent publications, such as Laura Gardner and Daphne Moija van Pesarant's work in Radical Fashion Exercises, I'm sure you're all aware probably of this publication, we now have valuable resources to incorporate into our classrooms. These resources not only encourage activities ranging from in-depth exploration to collaborative learning, but also inspires us to envision innovative techniques for challenging traditional pattern making and garment construction methods. We aim to emphasize the significance of the archive in the making, in advancing decolonial and feminist perspectives and practices. As fashion educators, we are eager to explore the archiving activities we have introduced to our students, reflecting on our own experiences, having both graduated from the Antwerp Fashion Department a decade ago, and having engaged in exercises that involved replicating existing garments. We found that this particular exercise has remained in our memory. It has been subject to critiques, adaptations, and transformations over time. Given that nothing remains static, these exercises undergo changes and evolve over time as a result of careful observations and constructive critiques. The projects in Halle Replay encompasses the function of archiving as a means to facilitate learning about craftsmanship, critical thinking, observation, and studying the works of revered designers. It also employs students to demystify pieces that are often considered untouchable by encouraging them to replicate and transform these items. The project in Antwerp, The Power of Fabulation, Fashioning your own objects of and knowledge, which will be experienced with students of St. Lucas. Both rely on power of creativity and imagination as a foundation for crafting fresh narratives and encouraging students to engage critical thinking within the realm of fashion, utilizing replicas. Share the conviction that these applications are indispensable for addressing these issues of erasure and colonial dominance within the fashion industry, counter the erasure of non-white narratives, and the erasure of the history of lower social classes. The following paper is informed by our experiences as educators and aims to investigate the role of archive of dress for fashion education.
So to foster students' development as conscious designers engaged in comprehensive clothing research, inclusion of historical garment research has become a fundamental component in the core curriculum of our fashion design course. Other than contemporary dress, of which students often already possess a thorough understanding when starting a fashion design course due to its ubiquitous nature and mediatization, historical pieces require an attentive investigation because of their unfamiliarity in pattern making, sewing techniques, and proportions. And replicating those historical pieces is an exercise in inquiring multiple resources, such as interpreting historical depictions of dress, interrogating academic research about the respective time period, and exploring primary research with museums and physical archives alike. This exercise has proven to be beneficial to familiarize students with historical and social context, textile techniques, design practice, and entrepreneurial strategies. And what we're also trying to do in Halle is that so the replicas that the students create, we build up an archive ourselves with these replicas and the documentation process so that future students can actually engage with these items and the research alike. So here we see one example. So we had 3 times we did this exercise with different focal points. So the first time we did really icons of fashion history. So it was the bar suit by Christian Dior, the tulip dress by Cristobal Balenciaga, a dress by Madeleine Vionnet, and a dress by Madame Grès, what you see here on the right side. So the state of research of these respective pieces is of course impeccable. So you have entire volumes on the pieces, the students can research it very thoroughly, and there's little information that is missing. In 2022, we did the same exercise with other pieces, with Jean Paquin's opera coat, Paul Poiret's sorbet evening dress, which we saw on the previous slide, Elsa Schiaparelli's skeleton dress and shoe hat. And while conducting these examples from fashion history, where we actually wanted to have mostly female designers, we already realized, okay, there's a lack of representation actually of female designers in those archives. Sort of culminating almost with a Sœur Caillot, 2 sisters from Paris who had a, could you maybe go to the next slide? We don't have a good image, I'm sorry for this. Anyway, it's an entire suit. They were very influential during that time in Paris, but there's very little documented. So students really had to start with comparative research of patterns of the time and had to argument somehow why this item was probably constructed the way they did it in the end. And the most recent example, actually my colleague Evelyn Zittler is also here, conducted it together with the Museum of Applied Arts in Berlin. But there was, of course, it's a sort of canonization. We again had, maybe you want to repeat the pieces we had. We had the, oh my gosh. It was, sorry, Nina Ricci, we had Givenchy.
Sorry, my brain is...
Yeah, I'm also blacking out now. Anyway, so this was also, I mean, there we again had a very good research, or Evelyn had very good research in collaboration with a museum. However, it was again the same name. So how do we treat this actually? So the, just to sum up, like these results from this exercise are then archived together with a comprehensive documentation of both the research process and the development of the replica. This initiative seeks to enhance accessibility for undergraduate students, many of whom may not have had the opportunity to personally touch, study closely, or explore the sacralized fashion pieces due to museum bureaucracy and travel limitations. Students can wear those clothes and they can feel the fabrics and they can engage also in a sort of sensorial experience. So this exercise has been repeated yearly now with changing focal points, and it is evident that even with those popular examples from Western fashion history, the current state of research we are confronted with contains massive gaps, which force students to speculate possible solutions in order to complete the task. So how could we utilize this missing information in order to learn about inherent values and subsequently discrimination in archives or in archives? How could speculation be a tool for activist imagination? Certain types of dress, as we all know, are valorized through the collection in archives and others are not. Some are better preserved and some names or periods attract more academic attention. An example is regal historical dress, which is often researched in great detail, from the yarn to the cutting pattern, and which would be a far easier exercise than, for instance, recreating clothing from medieval peasants. We can sum up that in the current state, archives contain well-maintained historical clothing and research from a privileged and limited demographic based on what was considered of value in the historical contemporaneity and political climate. So how do we deal with a state of research which is vastly incomplete? And we might need to look at immaterial archives, employ comparison, imagination, and speculation in order to elaborate on a more complete picture of the past.
So during a residency that I did in Senegal in the context of my PhD, I researched clothing archives there and the absence of them within post-colonial museology in Senegal. I discovered that physical archives aren't necessarily the only relevant way to transmit Sartorian knowledge. Also that the prism of Western fashion has erased many narratives that could still be told. In addition to the significance of broadening the scope of craftsmanship, textiles, pattern making, and tools employed in garment production, there is a compelling need to underscore the desacralization of objects within the archive. Consider the mask featured in Ousmane Sembène's film La Noire 2 from 1966, where Mbissine Thérèse Diop's clothes, so she was the actress and she actually crafted her own clothes, serve as narrative device illustrating the evolution of Black identity through clothing. This mask embarks on a journey spanning from Senegal to France and eventually returning to Dakar as a symbol of permanence. Unlike confined behind glass, safeguarded by protective paper, the mask is actively utilized, touched, handled, tried on, and worn. It embodies a dynamic presence, transmitting a message of communal belonging and shared cultural heritage. I believe that the process of replication serves to demystify, decolonize, and perhaps remove the aura of museum-like reverence from objects, enabling users to engage in playful exploration, learning, and imaginative experiences. Archiving fashion is also not a universally essential practice, which necessitates alternative research approaches such as gathering oral testimonies or investigating in the actual practices of dress. Quoting Ariela Aisha Zule's word, the violence of forcing everything to be shown and exhibited to the gaze is denied when the right in question is only the right. Archives could be allowed to disappear, reborn in different shapes, or simply fade from memory. Archives could be a territory of new reflections and practices, such as fabulations or objects of muscular memory. Muscular memory, another word coined by Ariela Zule. In this manner, our goal is to bridge the voids with speculative narratives that pave the way for fresh avenues of exploration. Amidst the simultaneous existence of numerous narratives, it's crucial to recognize that decolonization is not a process akin to eradicating a disease or a virus. Decoloniality entails embracing and coexisting with a radical acceptance of all perspectives. In an educational endeavor I'm undertaking with students at St. Lucas called The Power of Fabulation, Crafting Your Own Artifacts and Insights, we will explore the concept of fabricating archives as a means of experimentation. Over the course of these 5 days, students will engage in thoughtful contemplation regarding the act of dressing, drawing inspiration from their individual personal histories and backgrounds. The primary objective is to offer a comprehensive view of the multitude of fashion narratives while underscoring the dominance of a Eurocentric and bourgeois fashion system. Our goal is to explore ways to dismantle these boundaries, allowing our unique intersections to find expression. Yeah. Additionally, we seek to draw inspiration not only from our own experiences, but also from our ancestors, natural, imaginary, or spiritual. In this masterclass, I imagine an exploration of the practice of sensei that refers to Senegalese practice of crafting your own persona, as well as the idea of fabulation, following Saidiya Hartman's past dealing with the aftermath of slavery, the erasure of the afterlife of detritus of lives. Through these lenses, we will delve into the reenactment of dress as means of inventing a new self, allowing students to imagine a past and allow their voices to be heard.
And to conclude, I will try to sum it up quickly. I know I will not read everything now, but taking into account the fragmentation of the immaterial archive and physical archive alike, a mode of informed speculation will complement the state of knowledge and stimulate additional research. We also think that in the realm of historical artifacts and cultures of dressing, there's a pressing need for increased funding specifically dedicated to the making of these objects of memory, so to sort of investigate these blind spots, namely the underrepresentation of non-Western archives, diasporic Black archives, female designers, workers' wear, and non-bourgeois archives, the everyday dress, attire from lower social classes, and so on. And anyway, it's also about rebalancing knowledges, of course, of the immaterial realm and the material. And and we also just want to advocate for maybe building up archives. I think there's different universities also doing this already with different focal points. But
we give some examples.
Yeah, we give some examples. So we have the Mode Museum Library in Antwerp have so they have a selection of historical garments that students can actually touch and investigate. Or the School of the Art Institute in Chicago has the Fashion Resource Center with contemporary dress. And in order to just facilitate knowledge and not have these limits and borders actually that make it difficult for students and researchers alike. Would you like me to add something to the conclusion?
No, I mean, also in New Zealand, there is Doris Dupont that established the New Zealand Fashion Museum, which is a immaterial museum, also to talk about this immateriality of archive. And that's basically
And I think in the end, we also want to plead for initiatives like this, where we can create networks of knowledge, so that we can also access these different archives in order to create a more complete picture, actually, of historical dress. Thank you.
Much, Ed and Lars. Can I just open up for one question, because just to be aware of the time. Anyone wants to ask? Yes. Go ahead.
Amazing presentation. It reminded me of getting inspired by fashion by going to the DNA and seeing an exhibition of toiles from designers like Vivienne Westwood. And I was thinking about your fabrication archive project And are the students actually making garments from fabrics or different materials like paper, for example? I just wondered if you could expand a little bit more about that.
They do research in the fabrics. I mean, they research the fabrics that the original was made from, and then they need to sort of find replacement or alternative fabrics, because often these fabrics are made from with very costly resources. So then they need to think of the construction of the piece and then find a material that could match the construction. So we discussed this also in class a lot.
Okay, but I was wondering about the project where Antoine.
Sorry.
In the sense of making your own personal art. So would that use paper, for example?
Yeah, it's possibility. You can use any material that you want. Also inspired by different practitioners, artists. I would show also some artists that are disrupting this way of viewing the archive. There is Fabiola Jean-Louis, who is an American artist, and she actually has this project with paper dresses. And so this way is also for me important to actually give this freedom to disrupt the archive, and also not necessarily thinking about the element of conservation. We talked. I mean, Sandra really highlighted this idea of fashion with capital F, using fossil fuels, and the process of conservation is also very problematic in terms of that. So yeah, it's this idea that an archive is in the making, but also can be destroyed and can disappear.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because it also raises all these questions around replication and authenticity. And I think those are really central to thinking about sustainability.
No, exactly, and I mean, take for instance the Dior Museum in Paris, which is a very interesting place for many different reasons. But I mean, you do sometimes have replicas of garments, and a lot of museums, and then the real piece, supposedly to be real, is actually hidden, and so there is this hierarchy between like the replica and so it's also shifting that probably.
It's like sculpture as well, right? Because the V&A has replicas, whilst the real thing is in Rome or in Greece. But I mean, the conversations that I had with both Lars and Pierre were so interesting that I think there are more questions you could ask them beyond this, right? So thank you so much for really... Next we've got Stephanie and Karen. We'll be talking about the expressions of discarded design decisions as a reflective.
A nice picture of you.
Expression of discarded design.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm Stephanie Mandri de Oliveira, senior lecturer in fashion and textile design.
No.
You have to raise your voice.
I'm Stephanie, senior lecturer in fashion and textile design at the Swedish School of Textiles in Borås in Sweden. And with me is Landal.
Also senior lecturer and researcher in fashion and textile design at the Swedish School of Textiles.
You have to speak up.
Yes, I will.
You won't be able to try at the back.
No, okay. And I will also read a bit.
Please stick to the 15 minutes.
Yes. Please remind us if we go over time. And we are presenting expressions of discarded design decisions as a reflective tool to rethink fashion education. And we would like to start with a quote from Susan Sontag. Ours is a culture based on excess, on overproduction. The result is a steady loss of sharpness in our sensory experience. And it is in the light of the condition of our senses, our capacities, that the task of the critic must be assessed. What is important now is to recover our senses. We must learn to see more, to hear more, to feel more. In previous research, we have engaged with post-consumer waste as a pedagogical material to learn from and learn through. This quote stimulated further investigation of post-consumer waste materials with the aim to recover our senses. In excess of garment waste and overproduction, a search for value and meaning is needed. Waste as a material not to redesign, to recreate, but to dissect, examine, analyze, to see, imagine, speculate. What to find, to see in garment waste? Discarded garments that were once loved, not enough appreciated, or never even considered. As a pedagogical methodological tool, and in the shift of terminology from discarded garments to discarded design decisions, new paths open up that may direct towards new approaches that unlock new potentials. This research aims to explore the possibilities to rethink fashion design education through the lens of discarded design decisions in a series of explorations. In previous research, we defined the garment to be regarded as a set of design decisions and suggested a shift in terminology from that of discarded garments to that of discarded design decisions, with the aim to point to the responsibility of the designer. What if the point of departure for fashion education would start with the end, the discarded garments? What if the end initiated a new learning process in reversed manner, where traces of the old would imbue and inform the new?
The theoretical framework for this research builds fundamentally, but not exclusively, on the theories and suggestions as discussed by Fletcher and Tam in Earth Logic, the research on repairing our relationship with matter, as described by Daniel Brüggemann, the theories on fashion as a social practice and the subject matter of what is to be sustained by Otto von Busch, thoughts on speculative future and the lens on fashion as imaginative, delightful and pluriversal by Timo Rissanen, the sustainable approach to education, concepts of challenging norms, critical thinking, active participation and collaboration, embracing failure and authenticity by Bell Hooks. It also builds on Tim Ingold's approach to, rather than reading creativity backwards from a finished object to an initial intention in the mind of an agent, this entails reading it forwards in an ongoing generative movement that is at once itinerant, improvisatory, and rhythmic. Thoughts on acts on creation that use physical materials to reveal context, form, and time in relation to the concept of materialness by Nim Kulrat. The methodological framework that we use builds on the tradition to develop and use instructional concepts as method in artistic practice and research, as for example conducted by Yoko Ono, Brian Eno, Clemens Thornquist, and the latest book by Gardner and Mohayer, which also we're speaking about. A set of 21 instructional directions were formed as methods with the aim to engage with sensory and emotional values through post-consumer waste materials. The expressions of discarded design decisions inherent in the pieces gave direction to the explorations. We will now show a few of the instructional pieces.
Instructional piece number 3. Wrap the flowers not to freeze. Select flowers in the local flower shop or simply pick them. Compose a bouquet. Take one or several garments. Wrap the garments carefully around the bouquet. Smell the flower textile infusion. Place it at a dear place at home. Live with it for a minimum of a week. Get to know the qualities of both the flowers and the garments. Observe it changing. We then selected a few garments from our design material to compose various bouquets. A pink windbreaker, a mustard-colored kilted jacket, a red fleece jacket, a t-shirt with placement print, a shirt, a dress with paisley print, and a skirt with a repeated flower print, which was then selected for further investigation of the methodological piece. The bouquet was explored in the context of home space and life in search for building of relationships and connectivity. The senses in focus were sight, touch, smell. Discarded design decisions in focus were shape, print, color. Instructional piece number 7, wrap it. Take a garment and wrap it with translucent silk. Pay attention to the way of wrapping. Pay attention to the way of being wrapped. Observe the meeting of both materials in the movement of wrapping. Capture, rewrap. A knitted cardigan was wrapped in coral silk chiffon. A silk shirt dress was wrapped in pink silk chiffon. The different material qualities, colors, and textures interacted. Garment qualities were abstracted. The senses in focus were sight, touch. Discarded design decisions in focus were color, shape, pattern, texture, and detailed elements.
Instructional piece number 10, seeing through. Select a pair of colored glasses or filters. Choose a garment with a rich color palette. Photograph the garment through the red, yellow, blue, green, glasses, or analog filters. See the design decisions of color change. The design material, a range of post-consumer waste garments, first documented and then explored through colored filters. A close-up was then explored in the same way. A close-up of the style design material was explored. The colors of the design materials and the filters interacted. The clear, defined forms and lines were blurred. Garment qualities were abstracted. Senses in focus, sight. Discarded design decisions in focus, color, and texture. Instructional piece number 15, the wind blouse. Catch the air of the coast in a blouse. Enclose it with at least one knot. Capture its essence by photograph so that it embraces the wind that was caught in it. Describe the shape of the wind blouse with the pencil. An oversized white silk blouse was used to catch the wind of the coast. A pink windbreaker in medium size and a salmon-colored windbreaker in XL size were used to catch the wind of the coast. Charcoal found on site and sea tang were used for sketching. The surrounding had a great impact on activating the senses. Additional senses, such as smell, interacted with experiencing the garment. Senses in focus, sight, sound, touch, smell. Discarded design decisions in focus, shape, material, color.
Instructional piece number 20, an exercise for the sandy beach. Pack a range of garments to bring to the sandy beach. On arrival, unpack them. Select one. Lay out on a spot where the sand feels most attractive. The ground. Feel. Material, the borders, the outline, the features. Lift the garment off the ground. Look at the traces that remain, take a photo, repeat with another piece. A black sequined dress was pressed into the sand, then it was lifted off the ground. Shape, texture, and details remained. A striped acrylic cardigan and a pair of patched blue denim jeans were pressed into the sand, then they were lifted off the ground. An imprint of shape, texture, and details remained. The senses in focus were sight, sound, touch, and smell. The discarded design decisions in focus were texture, shape, details, lines. Instructional piece number 21, an exercise for the rocky beach. Pack a range of garments to bring to the rocky beach. On arrival, unpack them. Select one. Lay out on a spot where the rocks feel most divine. Enhance significant features with little rocks you find nearby. Take a photo. Repeat with another piece. Exploration 1. Significant features of purple silk of the purple silk blouse and blue denim jeans were enhanced with rocks. The instructional piece number 21 triggered further explorations. The instructions were extended as follows. Exploration 2. Lay out on a spot where the rocks feel most divine. Enhance significant features of the garment surrounding through the surrounding or the surrounding through the garment. Exploration 3. Extension upon the instructions as follows. Lay out on a spot where the rocks feel most divine. Enhance significant features of the garment, the surrounding, and their form and textural interaction. Exploration 4. Extension upon the instructions as follows. Lay out on a spot where the rocks feel most divine. Enhance significant features of the garment outlined with charcoal. The surrounding impacted the exploration of the garments, their shapes, colors, textures. The sense of sounds affected the sensing of form and materiality. The senses in focus were sight, sound, touch, and smell. The design decisions in focus were shape, texture, and color.
Reflections and conclusions. The result is a set of disruptive methodological pieces that aim to train and recover our senses and develop a greater awareness of the implications of our design decisions, their values and meaning. Garment-based learning was explored as a disruptive practice, a pause, an act of non-designing, a slow and low-intensity strategy, a change on the micro scale. Rather than nourishing a practice of redesign, this research proposes a poetic approach to post-consumer waste materials, which is as a pedagogical material to recover senses and values. How can we rethink pedagogical approaches to stimulate our senses? How can we engage in creative processes with greater awareness of the implications of our design decisions, their values and meanings? Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you.
listening.
So much. Has anyone got a question? Just one question that could be asked before Muyo and his team comes to present. Anyone would like to ask a question? Or we could speak to both afterwards. Okay? Thanks very much. Oh, would you like to ask a question?
No, I just want to say I would myself really like to do everything that you showed because it looked amazing and the landscape and so on. And I would like also maybe to hear about what are your students feeling? What are your observations of your students?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's really a lovely question, actually.
It's nice actually to explore it with the students because now we have just set up this framework and we really want to see how we can enhance the senses through these post-consumer waste materials, which are challenging actually to engage with. So that's the aim of this framework, and it's the next step to test it actually with the students and take them out of the classroom. Referring back to bell hooks actually, and engaging in a different environment. And disrupting the regular setup.
I think also getting them to reflect, right?
Yes.
When
Yes,
you've taken them
absolutely.
out and you've got them to do that? And what did they get out of it in terms of their attachment to the clothing as well, right? Yeah, brilliant. I mean, I've got another question, but I won't. I'll just say very quickly that I was really intrigued about the pedagogy. It's who's gone before and used pedagogy that draws in senses as a way of exploring a subject in greater detail. So that would be my question. Thank you. So introducing Muyo and Monica. Yes, thank you. So this is about gestural design, fashion designed by the wearer.
While we're setting this up, we'd just like to thank you so much for resisting the brilliant sunlight and joining us in the dark room, sticking around till the end. You guys are champions.
The two of you will be really loud.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Is this okay?
Yeah.
Because we want to open a window.
Hey.
Hello, folks. My name is Monica, and this is Muyo. And we're just graduated from Arts MA degree. I studied history of design,
and I studied MA fashion.
And we're gonna talk about something called gestural design. So before we dive into the meat of our research, we'd just like to talk about like from what kind of perspective we're talking about gestural design. So both Muyo and I have studied fashion design during our BA studies in Korea. And our curricula were different because we went to different schools. But I think we both had a sense that Korean fashion wasn't creative enough and that we needed to go to Paris, London, New York, these fashion capitals, to study real fashion, fashion with a capital F. When I came to the UK to study history of design and kind of familiarize myself with the design education system there, I gradually realized that the Eurocentric definition of creativity was quite narrow and it was failing to capture a lot of other ways making works.
Yep, so indeed, even since I came to London, what fashion with capital F students want to be in the end was similar. Things like creative director, LVMH prize, or the title of talented young designer. And I thought there was a big gap in fashion education, especially between tutors who are trying to make sure that students didn't get hung up on those things and students who still aspire those things. So rather than trying to become a better capital F fashion designer myself, I tried to find other ways making works that Monica mentioned.
So when I was writing my MA dissertation on originality and new, defined by the Eurocentric fashion system, I spoke to a Korean designer working at a British fashion brand who also graduated from RCA Fashion. So I asked him how new is defined in London. He said, unlike Seoul, where new is maybe like something closer to doing something adjacent to new or trend, in London, he saw a lot of students who continued their BA projects into their MA work. So what is new in London is rather linear. It relates to the designer as an individual, what comes from within. Such an understanding of creativity, despite its merits, has been criticized for forming the image of a lone genius who possesses an innate gift, as Pierre-Antoine and Lars did in their second presentation. Even in the realm of knowledge, quote unquote geniuses like Isaac Newton, like he gathered his knowledge thanks to the missionaries whom he was in contact with, and he would consult to fact check new pieces of information. Nevertheless, I have to say there is something very appealing and sexy about the notion of linear creativity and the lone genius. Historically, how do you agree? Historically, there were designers who actively took part in making such an image for themselves, like Paul Pry, who acquainted himself with modernism, and others who were painted out to be so, like by others. It's also a very digestible and marketable idea as well. Changing creative directors now is a go-to move to rebrand a business. And as much as the creative directors are praised for their achievements, they often become the scapegoat for blame and seen as completely replaceable. And it's also good for school business. One of the main reasons why fashion students flock to certain schools is to follow the path of insert certain fashion designer's name. And some schools take advantage of that fantasy, which was criticized earlier this year, coinciding the teacher strike in the UK, most notably by the banner hung in the entrance hall of Central St. Martin's University Arts of London. Beyond the irresponsibility of educational institutions, the narrow definition of creativity, originality, and innovation as something individual, cerebral, and introspective contributes to uphold the colonial legacies of the Eurocentric fashion system. Even though fashion is becoming more and more global, as we see fashion weeks happening all over the world, the real fashion still comes from the Western fashion capitals, attracting, well, people like us to London. This is because in the late 20th century, the global division of labor occurred to produce more clothes and satiate the unwavering definition of fashion as change and distinction. Korea was one of the main sites of manufacturing for this type of fashion. This work that is done in the garment district in Seoul called Dongdaemun is often characterized as mind-numbing and backbreaking, where there is no room for creativity. However, as the anthropologist Park So-young clearly pointed out, the intimacy between the maker and the material shows creativity of divergences and improvisations that is outside the authorized creativity. To put it differently, we're missing out so much on how the act of creation works just by focusing on what happens before making. What happens to objects while they are made and after they are made? What happens to them when they leave the brain of the designer? So this is where looking into wearing and wearers become appealing to me. Fashion scholars have been pointing out the importance of viewing fashion as embodied rather than semiotic for more than 20 years. As much as humans make the clothes make us do things, make us move certain ways, place us in certain locations, or ban us from going there. Beyond flipping the designer-wearer human clothes hierarchy, there's also something subversive about focusing on materiality precisely because it's harder to be co-opted, we think. The sociologist Paul Sweetman recognized to regard fashion as experiential and effectual processes suggests whatever their semiotic status, contemporary fashions and styles may be less easily adopted and or discarded than certain theorists of late, high, or post-modernity would seem to imply. In other words, thinking about fashion in terms of wearing and materiality is harder to capitalize on, which goes against the tired definition of fashion as capitalism's favorite capricious child.
So this is my main question. How can you explore the wearer's creativity? Wearing seems to be kind of conscious behavior with no room for creativity, which may be why we have paid less attention to what happens after the garment is made than we have to the design process. This perception of wearing itself is one of the reasons why fashion design have evolved to cater to a fixed body with little consideration for the body's movement, the clothes, which is the performance of the wearer. Therefore, I wanted to reconsider the perception of wearing as a practice that can be applied to design by designers or writing by editors, eventually building the concept of elevated wearer and foregrounding the wearer. In order to capture the creativity of the wearer, I have been working with performers to archive footage of their wearing and interviews in 3 phases, each divided into representation of first, everyday wearing, second, experimental wearing through performance theory, third, wearing as an interpretation of clothes. So in page 1, 4 wearers play their own daily dress routines. By doing this, I wanted to highlight the experiential and emotional aspects of fashion that individuals can feel through their clothes. The wearers stated that they were unable to reproduce their daily wearing routine because the clothes were new to them. The camera and the audience, which makes the on-siteness of the performance, also created a distance between the garment and the wearer, so it allowed for creative wear. And the garments are not my design, so that there was no designer in the scene. It was therefore a performance affected by the clothes materiality, not by the designer's direction and visualization. However, this step still left the question of whether wearing could be extended beyond personal behavior to a creative practice. I needed a way to find out wearing's creative aspect, so I adopted a performance theory, which is the Laban movement analysis by Rudolf Laban, one of the founders of European modern dance. I experimented with wearing by breaking down into the theory's 4 domains, which is body, effort, shape, and space. Each element acted as a constraint that made it difficult to wear the clothes. The constraints led to the creation of different wearing gestures despite the same clothes and the same wearer to explain the immediacy of wearing, which changes from moment to moment, and to exaggerate the interaction between the clothes and the body to visually capture the movement of the body and clothes. The second page allowed me to see the potential to think about how to wear the garment and develop creative ways of wearing it. The wearer is sensitive to the weight of the garment, the feel of the material, and the movement that the structure of the garment creates. Those experiential aspects translate the design of the garment into a body language, which turned out to be more inclusive than words. So, in the third page, I worked with performers in Oslo to create case studies with a few ready-to-wear garments, where the body interpreted the materiality of the fashion design. For example, the structure of the trousers, in which the pattern was split at the knee and darted at the seam line, were understood when the performer's leg and the seam allowance met. Then the performer performed wearing the trousers, taking into account the design she perceived through her wearing and being extra careful when her foot passed the knee area of the trousers. So we distilled our findings from the 3 pages of wearing into materiality, movement, and social aspects. First, materiality. In Oslo, when one of the performers wore a double-sided hoodie made of different fabrics, she demonstrated her attempts to take advantage of the tactile qualities of each material, putting it on a different speeds and bearing the amount of contact with the skin with the fabric as much as possible as she wore it. These attempts demonstrate the wearer can interpret different garments and their designs performatively according to how they feel, not just visually style them as pieces of adornment. Furthermore, in interviews that accompanied the performance, the performers from Oslo defined wearing as beginning with an encounter between the hand and the garment, and then extending from the hand to the rest of the body as the garment gradually becomes part of the body and the body becomes part of the garment. Indeed, one of the performers explained that it was ambiguous whether she was wearing the garment or whether the garment was forming on osmosis with the body.
Our second finding was movement, not language. As we saw in the second and third phases, different fashion production techniques draw different movements, creating what we decided to call gestures of wearing. Already, Muyo and I were coming from different disciplines, me from fashion, from history of design, and Muyo from fashion design. So we have different vocabularies, which forces us to use more intuitive and simple words when we're communicating. Similarly, the wearer's gestures of wearing, expressing the weight of the fabric, folds and seams used in the design, create a new type of language that is perhaps more accessible than professional fashion design terms. Finally, wearing is still social. In a setting where the wearers do not have a choice in the clothes they wear and are taking turns wearing the same clothes from the same brand, we found that wearing clothes is a social process. In the first phase, one performer expressed envy in seeing other performers wearing the clothes she would wear in the next turn. In the second phase, when the performers were prompted to dress each other, they stated that it involved a lot of trust. So even when you're hyper-focused on your body and clothes, clothes are social materials.
And before we define the gesture or design, who is this performative wearer? This series of work, like 3 pages, is an attempt to acknowledge wearing as performance, as it actually invites performers to intuitively approach performative wearing through their bodily knowledge and instincts. We argue that the wearer needs to creatively engage with clothes and put it into the practice of wearing, the gestures of wearing. Performative wearer is a term we suggest to describe such wearers. Performative wearers take a careful, considered, and even critical approach to wearing, moving away from consuming linear narrative of designers that are fed to them or repeating the fantasy of designer as the lone genius. Performative wearers intentionally disrupt empathy and immersion into designer's narrative by interpreting the clothes through their own gestures of wearing, so that the garments are not just the output of the designer.
There's so much feature.
Sorry?
On the computer.
Just say,
Like an update, sorry. Sorry. Yeah, sorry. So in South Korea, we tell people who have ideal body shapes, those resembling fitting models, you have a nice hanger. This describes the status of the current wearer, like the mannequin in fashion studio and those or the agents to the designer who hangs their creation on a piece of hanger. Performative wearers of gestural design, however, are not constrained by the fit suggested are not constrained by the fit suggested by the designer. They rather communicate their own understanding of their garments through their own language, which we call the gesture of wearing. Just as avant-garde fashion has expanded the aesthetic possibilities of fashion design, we propose gestural design that aims to expand the aesthetic possibilities of fashion itself by appreciating and understanding clothes in a different way from the tired narrative tied to the designer's inspirations and backgrounds. It will also be one way of bringing those outside of fashion into fashion, both because it simply brings wearers into design studios and the gestures of wearing may help with understanding fashion design more intuitively.
So we have so far discussed the potential of bringing this methodology like as a workshop at a school or a museum setting, but we have some concerns that make us rather hesitant to share a very concrete action plan for just now. So we would like to share some of our concerns with you, and we can talk more about it in Q&A time. So like in terms of practical aspects, we wonder like what kind of clothes do we utilize in these workshops? Like do we utilize like ready to wear or couture or like not famous brands, or I don't know, brands at all? And is there a role of a performative wearer in a school setting? And can the performers engage in critical wearing with a well-known brand? So kind of similar question to the first one. And the bigger questions are even if we kind of saw the potential of like this being harder to be like capitalized, there is still, I think, risk of being like the footage of the performative wearers, the video being like co-opted by and becoming a marketing tool. And there's also a risk of creating hierarchy between wearers. And finally, we think there's a risk of fashion education system kind of not seeing this methodology as fit and kind of, moving into another discipline that is not fashion. So that's it for us, and thank you for listening.
Very interesting. Can I just
let's open it up to a question, please. Who would like to ask a question about wearing and the gesture of wearing and the role of the wearer in the design of fashion? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Very interesting subject.
Please speak up.
Sorry. Thank you for the presentation. That very interesting relation between the wearer, clothing, and design aspect, and finally you bind it to the education perspective. I also believe that, also Walter Benjamin actually pointed out that the aura of the clothing actually is related with the wearer, and that the jacket, for example, it takes the identity of the wearer. So in that aspect, it looks like there is no criticism, but there is a kind of adoption in between the wearer and the clothing. But you mentioned about critical wearing, and I think I found it very interesting, and I would like you to open it a little bit.
What do you mean by critical wearing?
What kind of possible interpretations or what kind of possible creative inputs for the wearer? Because when you actually choose a clothing, you choose it because you want to wear it. But then by time maybe your relation with the clothing changes emotionally. Sometimes we love some clothing, sometimes we hate because of our experiences related with the clothing, or that, maybe if you, I can have different interpretations, but maybe.
Well,
thank you.
Yeah, as you mentioned, during the collaboration between performers and I, there was no critical statement like, oh, this is uncomfortable. But yeah, so the critical means, for me, it's a kind of speculation. For example, in fashion design school studio, we of course, we invited fitting models or other models every time. But I think I never heard they say something when they fit their designer's clothes. But in case of me, I don't know, but I also sometimes wear other friends' clothes or other fashion designs as a fitting model. In that case, I have some knowledge of a fashion design, so I can criticize, I can give some feedback as a wearer, not just designer, as a field wearer. Okay. So in that case, if this gestural design become, I don't know, realization, then I think we can replace this traditional typical fitting model into performative wearer. So even they do not know knowledge of fashion design or professional fashion terms, they can criticize by their interpretation of fashion design. Like in Oslo, performers detect the fashion design dart or seam allowance with wearing without any information, with just their bodily knowledge. So critical means something like that for me.
So it's almost like giving feedback. The wearer
experience
that fit and the size and the seam allowance and so on. Yeah, the movement. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I mean, one thing I might add. Well, I asked when we were in our preliminary stage why we kind of started with performers in the first place, is because one of the I think, as Muriel said, they have more, I don't know,
bodily knowledge.
So there's also the question of people who perform professionally and how they are different in their bodily knowledge compared to the public. That's another question. But yeah, the reason why we were consulting performers is because they have more bodily knowledge, and they one of them detected that with this design element I can create this kind of movement, and maybe other than that.
So you say that it can be the means of another level of learning then? Okay.
Feel more with it. Yes. And in fact, the photographs, I mean, you didn't show these photos, but you showed those me, which was that they were so confident with the space around them. They were making movements that an ordinary wearer would not make. So they were taking this space around and using it comfortably. And I'm just thinking about your work as well. If you used a performer to wear clothes that are large, do you think they would have a greater confidence in doing fittings? Someone who is performative?
Like a large-bodied performer, you mean?
Yeah.
Perhaps, yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to be fully embodied.
Yeah.
Consciousness of the body.
Right.
Yeah.
I was just thinking of the New York Ballet because they do this. Usually, what they do is they create the piece first, and then they make the clothing. But there's once a year where the designers drive. So they create the design and then they create the dance based on that design, which I think is really interesting because, I mean, this past season it was like Raf Simons, I forget the other designer, but I think that's really interesting because it's like, it's turning that process around and making the fashion more important than the performance in that sense.
So hold on, Raf Simons makes the garment for the National Ballet.
For the ballet, yeah.
And then the ballet dancer fits into it.
Then the
within it.
performance is based on that fashion piece. So the choreographer works hand in hand with the designer. So last year it's like fashion. I forget what it was produced. Solange was producing it. That's why I went. But it was Raf Simons. I'm trying to think of the other two designers. But yeah, it's just an interesting perspective. I didn't know that and you can just see the way that they move and they're created just based on the movement of those pieces.
That's amazing. That's something that you could look at as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know, it's been really wonderful. I think all of the speakers, what interesting topics.
Paloma. What's that? Paloma something. Like
I was trying to quickly
Yes.
Google as well.